My presentation deals with a double killjoy, and thank you, Petra, for introducing the concept. So it's feminism and anti-war activism. So let's start. This is a print of the Charter of Anti-War Campaign taken from first issue of Argzin. Argzin was anti-war campaigns newspaper, or actually fanzine. It started as a fanzine and then later became magazine, and we played with the name. So this seemingly commonsensical charter of the anti-war campaign Croatia was launched on 4th of July 1991 and served as a platform for gathering anti-war voices more than 3 decades ago. Despite its apparent simplicity, I believe the Charter presents itself as an interesting material for discourse analysis. Allow me just one brief remark. At the very beginning, a Charter advocates, among other things, for the ecological welfare. The European Union just recently came up with the Green Deal. And here we have, against patronizing and auto-colonial discourse of transition imposed on post-socialist countries, clear political program which combines peace, democracy, social, economic, and ecological welfare. But back to the topic. The last paragraph of the Charter contains the statement which will become defining feature for Croatian anti-war activism in the years to come. And the statement is, we will communicate and cooperate regardless of differences in political views and future relations between the republics. This determination to keep the contact with the other side very soon became the reason for divisions among feminists, which I elaborate a bit later. For now, I would like to highlight the fact that the Charter was supported by few dozens of then existing women, green and spiritual activist groups, and several hundreds of individuals. Here on this slide, you can see the most important women groups formed during the 80s, which are the forerunners for the anti-war activism in the 90s. I'm glad that Biljana is here. Biljana was actively involved in few of these groups. And so I invite her to share maybe some of her experiences, or please join the, yes. Again, countering the notion of Yugoslav socialism as a totalitarian regime, and here I would like to mention that these cultural wars over defining the Yugoslav socialism are still going on. Just recently, a week or two ago, well-known Croatian political scientist Mirjana Kasapović published the article Zbogom post-Jugoslavenstvu, Goodbye to Post-Yugoslavism, in which article she tries to prove totalitarian nature of socialist Yugoslavia. But just this list of feminist groups from the 80s indicates diverse and vibrant activist scene flourishing during this decade. Here we have feminist groups dealing with theory, domestic violence, ecofeminism, radical feminism, even one lesbian group. They, along with alternative youth, media, ecological and spiritual initiatives, very similar to alternative cultural movements in the West at that time, constitute forerunners of anti-war groups and media in the 90s. Yes, just a little remark. This, what you can see on this slide are badges, handmade badges, It was a time when badges were very popular among activists, but also music subcultural scene, and we painted it by hand and produced it as yeah. But then, after all this flourishing in the 80s, the war started. And behind the mythology of just and defensive homeland war, reality looked quite different. We were faced with national homogenization and militarization of society, with political instrumentalization of violence and tolerated lawlessness, which included political murders and torture, mobilization of criminals, evictions. For anyone interested in this topic, I would highly recommend extensively documented book, State and Crime, Politics and Violence in Croatia between 1990 and 2012 by Croatian political scientist Krešimir Petković. Then another feature was historical revisionism, rehabilitation of Ustaša regime, followed by rejection of anti-fascist past, which was vividly symbolized in demolition of anti-fascist monuments. Media control with mass layoffs of journalists, and retraditionalization and repatriarchalization, both processes greatly supported and even led by Catholic Church. In words of Croatian feminist Đurđa Knežević, it was the war for the domination of the nation over the individual, the state over society, ethnic majority over minorities, patriarchy over women. While it is fair to say that a lot of our work during the 90s was centered around providing help for refugees or some other not so controversial activities such as nonviolent communication and education, this hidden war constituted the framework for our anti-war activism. Very soon, our opposition to nationalism and all the aforementioned processes, along with our commitment to maintain contact with Serbian anti-war feminists, became the reason for public witch hunts as well as divisions between patriotic and abstract feminists. First public split happened in 1992 during the international conference Women at War, which was held in Zagreb and organized by radical feminists from Kareta and some members of the group Women Say It Now. Trouble started already during the preparation of the conference because organizers didn't involve women activists engaged in women's shelter, even though they were members of the same group, Women Say It Now. And the reason was that women around women's shelter were involved with anti-war campaign. During the conference, there are a few women from Serbia who just happened to be in Zagreb at the time, but they were not allowed to speak. After the conference, Women's Aid Now group split into two groups. One kept the SOS telephone line, and the other became Autonomous Women's House, shelter for women and children victims of domestic violence, and Autonomous Women's House became part of anti-war network. The key points of disagreement revolved around the question of naming the victims and aggressor. This was the ultimate issue imposed by leading politicians and mainstream media, and which served as a means to publicly expose national traitors. So you have to declare yourself, otherwise you was exposed as anti-Croatian. So any public expression of anti-war political views, advocacy for gender equality, human rights, and the rights of national minorities, as well as opposition to the warmongering of all warring parties, was portrayed in the mainstream media as anti-Croatian and treasonous activity, and some patriotic feminists aligned themselves with this narrative. Second point of disagreement was the issue of cooperation with women groups from Serbia, and third, the cooperation with the anti-war campaign Croatia. It is also worth mentioning that in December of that same year, 1992, one of the most shameful episodes in Croatian journalism occurred when the weekly magazine Globus published a notorious article titled "Witches from Rio, Croatian Feminists Rape Croatia." 5 Croatian writers, journalists, and publicists, Jelena Lovrić, Rada Iveković, Slavenka Drakulić, Vesna Kesić, and Dubravka Ugrešić, to whom the last evening session was dedicated, were accused of allegedly lobbying against the holding of next PEN Congress in Dubrovnik during the PEN Congress in Rio de Janeiro that year. The article included intimate details about these women, almost in the form of warrant. Subsequently, these women faced numerous threats, and 3 of them left the country. Just very brief remark, when we are talking about Dubravka Ugrešić, her book, Culture of Lies, was actually first edition was published by Argzin, I mentioned at the beginning, in 1996. So there are some connections. And anyway, division among Croatian feminists deepened next year in 1993 after the discovery of mass rapes in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The conflict occurred during the International Women's Tribunal, Women's Solidarity, also held in Zagreb, where the central theme was the interpretation of mass rapes during the war in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. 2 women's organizations from Croatia, Bedem Ljubavi, Bastion of Love, it was organization of mothers of soldiers, and radical feminist group Skareta, together with 2 Bosnian women groups, Bosnian Women and Biser, Pearl, took the position that mass rapes in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia have an exclusively ethnic background and presented unverified and exaggerated numbers of raped women. Their interpretation was very much in the line with official state, Croatian state approach, which used this tragedy for even more warmongering and demonizing Serbian side. Patriotic feminists criticized the anti-war feminists for holding the Croatian authorities accountable for war crimes and for pointing out the patriarchal, machistic background of wartime sexual violence against women, and therefore called them abstract feminists. On the other hand, for the anti-war feminists, any alignment with Croatian state at that time was unacceptable, particularly because Croatian state in 1993 began to take a more active role in the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, supporting the so-called Herceg Bosna and sending Croatian troops to fight there. All of that was followed by anti-Muslim and anti-Bosniak media propaganda. As late Croatian feminists, journalists, one of the witches from Rio and one of the founder of the Center for Women War Victims, Vesna Kesić, said, Women were used as victims on whose bodies nationalism inscribed its state-building projects and thousand-year dreams. Apart from groups like the Center for Women War Victims, no one took care of the real victims, nor organized help and support for a long time. Here is also the political position of the Center for Women War Victims, as it was, as it's stated in their web presentation, and which also clearly underlines this feminist, anti-militarist stance, and also what I think it's important, this general attitude to help women regardless of their nationality, ethnicity, religious beliefs, status, age, and sexual orientation. Regarding our commitment to maintain cooperation with the enemy side, I've included here a beautiful poem written by Biljana in '94, titled Crossing the Lines. And Biljana, would you honor us by reading your poem?
Because at the time we had all lines, so we we couldn't communicate at the time. Network that was not used at that time.
It was already, yeah, but just beginning, yeah.
Yes, in March. Probably it was at that time, so it's very difficult to read it. I forgot. It was a song or it was a message, probably both. I don't know. Or poem. I don't know. Really. Okay.
Anyway, I remember you I think you tell us that you wrote it in the middle of the night. Yeah. And yes, you send it by email or yes. That was the yeah. So sending by email and mentioning email connect us with another feature of our anti-war feminist activities. And this is a project which actually came about because of sheer necessity and which also connects us to contemporary world of digital communication technologies. We are talking about Zamir, which means for peace, transnational network, which was made up of local bulletin board systems, BBSs, which was sort of early internet before the World Wide Web was created. BBS technology allowed email exchange and also provided space for public discussions, which were sort of small public forums or conferences, we call it then. And Zamir was introduced because the telephone lines between Croatia and Serbia were cut late in the 1991, mostly because of political reasons in order to prevent communication between two countries. So our friends from Germany suggested this new technology as solution. At the beginning of 1992, the first modem was attached to the computer in ARC office, ARC for anti-war campaign, and BBS Zamir Zagreb was formed. Then followed Zamir Belgrade and Zamir Ljubljana, and all these nodes were connected through server in Germany, so the messages flew through then still nascent internet. In that way, this electronic network connected post-Yugoslav peace, women's, and human rights groups among themselves and with the world. By 1996, Zamir had 7 nodes. Pristina, Tuzla, and Pakrac were added and had several thousand users. And at that time, it became a firmly established transnational communication space, as I said, linking regional activists with each other and the world over its connection with Association of Progressive Communication, APC. 2 feminists, or rather cyber-feminist projects, are connected to Zamir. The first one is the educational project Electronic Witches, which was initiated by Women's Infoteca and was primarily carried out by 2 women international volunteers who traveled across the region, teaching women how to use this new technology. As stated by one of them, Catherine Turnipseed, American volunteer, at that time, computers were generally perceived as not very close to women, mystified and generalized as a male domain. In such circumstances, the education provided by Electronic Witches focused not only on the transfer of skills, but also on freeing women from fear and low self-confidence regarding the use of technology. The other cyber feminist project was a public conference on Zamir women. And if I remember correctly, it was not exclusively women's space. Men, members of the network, could also read the messages, but they were not allowed to participate in discussions. Basically, Zamir women served for exchanging the information and for discussions, planning, etc., and constituted very first digital feminist public space in the region. In words of Nela Pamuković, the important thing was that the feminist scene that became in that XU space kept that electronic space as feminist beyond the state's borders, as a parallel world, a ghetto that had its own laws independent of the local mainstream. Zamir women became a space where a lot of discussions took place, and I refer here to one important, which took place in 95-96, and which was about internal power relations and leadership within feminist organizations. Namely, many women who initially in these years joined women organizations with primary motivation of doing humanitarian work in refugee camps, after being educated about feminist relief work, began using Zamir and actively engaged in discussions. So they started questioning the existing organizational structures against the feminist principles they were taught in these workshops. So this combination of online and offline interactions became a fertile ground for feminist political socialization and articulation of new feminist subjects, which resulted also in forming of some new women's organizations. So this slide just outlines the mushrooming of women's groups during these challenging times. Despite the hostile environment, women were engaged in political, social, and media work, while also finding capacity to reflect on their activism and even to establish knowledge-producing institutions such as the Center for Women's Studies in Zagreb, which is our host also here. Many of the aforementioned women groups were members of broader anti-war network that included numerous human rights, peace, media, and youth organizations all over Croatia. And this diagram shows approximately how this network looked like. And now we fast forward to the year 2022. One might assume that such a rich anti-war heritage would result in a strong anti-war outcry at the onset of the military escalation in Ukraine. Unfortunately, that was not the case. There were only two public gestures in response to the Russian invasion. One was initiated by the Center for Peace Studies in Zagreb, and the other was the Women's Appeal for Peace, initiated by Biljana, again, and signed by several. But you gave the impulse, and then few of us worked on the text of the appeal. And appeal was signed by several hundreds of women from Croatia region and around the world. Just like in the 1990s, when we held our own state accountable for its role in the war, Women's Appeal doesn't turn a blind eye to the geopolitical and financial interest of the states, powerful states, and state unions Croatia is part of. And once again, this was enough reason for some women to choose not to sign the appeal, even though the appeal starts with very clear condemnation of Russian invasion. And after these two initial gestures in February 2022, followed the year of civic silence. Nothing happened. Not nothing, only humanitarian work with Ukrainian refugees was carried out. And somehow, just before the anniversary of war in Ukraine, we start together. It was again in a Center for Women's Studies. Stasha Zajović, founder of Women in Black in Belgrade, was guest at one of the evenings, and we talked about our position, and that was a starting point for forming ad hoc feminist anti-war coalition, which along with the public statement and demands addressed to Croatian Prime Minister and President, organized a public protest on February 24th. And our protest, titled Stop the War Now, was part of broader protest actions taking place in many European cities during those days, under the umbrella of the large anti-war network called Europe for Peace. Okay. It is worth mentioning that reports in Croatian media were quite benevolent, unlike some of the reactions on Facebook, where we were accused of being pro-Russians. This accusation was not so painful as belittling we've got from some prominent male political commentators who ridiculed us as naive or even incompetent and dumb. I must add here that it's very sad to see how some of these commentators perceive themselves as very progressive and emancipated. I won't read our demands here because we are running I'm running out of time. Along with demands, we in our statement we also listed all these things we opposed, and after our protest action on 24th of February, we also participated in 9th March on the International Women's Day on the 8th of March. But despite the fact that ad hoc feminist anti-war coalition was supported by 8 Croatian women's and peace organizations, we didn't succeeded in igniting any significant peace activities after these events regarding the ongoing war in Ukraine. I'm aware that peace groups in Europe are also struggling with their positioning towards the war, so much so that some of them even demands more weapons for Ukraine. However, I believe that the lack of interest demonstrated among Croatian NGOs can be partially attributed to the completion of the neoliberal political order in Croatia, where activist groups are transformed into civil society organizations, caught in an endless struggle for funding and forced to adjust their project activities to the latest agenda set by national and international foundations.